golf fans? It's your boy Luke with our course breakdown for this week's RBC Canadian Open. We're going to go over everything you need to know about St. George's Golf and Country Club, which we don't see all that often on tour. It is an event that cycles from course to course up there in Canada, so a lot to go over here. A little bit more of a deep dive here in this course breakdown, but like I said, going to cover everything about this venue. So our key stats, our comp courses here, and even going to go hole by hole here, breaking down some of the strategy that players will be facing this week with this venue. So whether you're outright betting, you're placing DFS lineups, you're going to be equipped with all the knowledge you need for this week. So a lot to get into. Going to do this in as condensed a format as humanly possible. Let's go ahead and hop right on into it. We'll start with the field, which this week is a good one. 156 golfers teeing it up, which compared to 120 at the Memorial means a lower percentage of the players will be making it to the weekend. So for your Draftkings contest, might see a little bit of a lower 6 of 6 percentage, but some of the notables this week, and oh boy are there a ton, include Scotty Scheffler, defending champion Rory McIlroy, who won this event at minus 2022. In 2019, you got Cameron Smith, Shane Lowry, Tony Finau, Justin Rose, Terrell Hatton, Patrick Reed, some Canadians in the field, including Corey Connors, who does definitely headline the hometown bunch. Just an extremely strong field considering this event is right before the US Open. A lot of players use this week to gear up for that event, and perhaps because of the Live Golf event this week, you're seeing a little bit of a stronger field. They want to compete with some of those TV ratings, all of that sort of fun stuff. Whatever the case is, from a fantasy and outright perspective, we get a stronger field than most, which none of us are going to complain about. In terms of the past champions, like I said, you had Rory McIlroy, who won this in 2019. The year before that, it was DJ. You had Johnny Vegas winning back-to-back years before DJ won, and Jason Day winning back in 2015. In general, all of these players extremely solid off the tee, players that are gaining in both ball striking categories, which even though this golf course, hasn't been there for all of those events, I think that's going to be a similarity for pretty much any PGA Tour event, right? So not really anything to look into there. The cut line in 2019 was -2. If I was going to project it this week, of course, we haven't even touched on this week's venue yet. I'm somewhere between even and +2. And speaking of the venue, let's hop into it. It is St. George's Golf and Country Club, which is just outside Toronto, Canada. It is a Stanley Thompson design, a par 70, but an atypical par 70 at that, with 3 par 5s and 5 par 3s. So rather than the 4 par 3s and 2 par 5s, you get one of each added to the docket. So a little bit of a strange setup there, particularly when you consider that 4 of the par 5s are over 200 yards, and one of them is extremely short, under 150 yards. So a huge polarization when it comes to the approach shots on those par 3s. And the par 5s, 2 of them are unbelievably gettable, less than 535 yards. So you're looking at every single player in the field pretty much having a crack at that green, even out of the rough. So expect to see quite a few eagles on the docket this week. The scorecard yardage at St. George's is 7,014 yards, which seems very short, at least from a cursory glance. But if we take a look into the approach buckets, you'll see that a lot of your iron shots are coming from over 200 yards. Obviously, with those par 3s, those long 200-plus yard par 3s, that's going to add to that bucket. But even the par 5s, you're still hitting over a 200-yard approach. And all of the par 4s, and I mean all of them, are either under 400 yards or over 450 yards. There are none in that 400 to 450 yard range, which is the most common and popular range on the PGA Tour. There are none in that range, which shows you that there's going to be a huge emphasis on both the long irons and the wedges on those short holes. So it's definitely a golf course where we're going to break it down by proximity bucket because there is going to be such a dispersion between the players. The greens here are relatively small, 4,000 square foot per green on average, which is right around 1,500, maybe even 2,000 square foot less than the average PGA Tour course. They're running at 12s on the stint meter, and they are a creeping bent grass. So we've been seeing bent grass for the last 3 to 4 weeks on tour. So taking a look at some of the hot putters of late, probably not a bad idea here. The fairways right around tour average in terms of width, and they are a bent POA mix. So you know, not really anything to look at there, but the rough is 3.5-inch Kentucky bluegrass rough. That is certainly something to focus on because Kentucky bluegrass rough is tough to begin with, but much like we saw at the Wells Fargo Championship, when it's 3.5 inches plus, when it grows to 4.5 inches over the weekend, it gets gnarly to hit out of. You have to have extremely high club head speed to have any chance of getting out of that stuff. So in terms of driving accuracy versus power this week, again, we're going to go hole by hole here. It'll become extremely evident. There's going to be a huge emphasis on the guys that are accurate off the tee. And if I had to just sum up this golf course, this is very similar to TPC Potomac, a few of the other comp courses I have, like a Colonial Country Club that we've seen of late. It's all about accuracy over power, right? Or precision over power might be the better way to put it. TPC Southwind comes to mind, same thing with Harbor Town Golf Links. You get yourself in the fairway, you avoid that gnarly rough, you hit some solid approach shots to relatively small targets, again, just 4,000 square foot on average, and then you have greens that have a ton of undulation. So it's all about, you know, that accuracy, all about kind of what Billy Horschel did this week, right? Going out there, hitting fairways, hitting greens, and two-putting. He did that all day there on Sunday, and that was a huge reason that he won that golf tournament. A very similar type of strategy is what you're going to need to take down this event. So let's go hole by hole now. I'll show you guys exactly the type of strategy that these players are facing to give you an even better idea of how to attack this place. All right, we've got the Pro Visualizer tool up, and one thing I want to just start with here is this isn't a golf course that you can really overpower. I mean, this is a place you have to think yourself around. Like I said, play a little bit more strategically, but the last time we played here, Carl Pedersen did take this to a 60, so he shot 10 under par at this venue. So there are low rounds out there, but you better be perfect, almost like what we saw from Billy Horschel there on Saturday at the Memorial. So let's look at this golf course. First and foremost, hole number 1 is going to be an iron off the tee for pretty much the entire field, and it's not because it's, you know, a relatively short hole. It's still almost 400 yards. You're going to have right around 150, 175 yards in. If you hit an iron off the tee, it's these trees to the left, which you can't really get a respect for them here on the satellite imagery, but these are insanely dense over here to the left. If you shank it to the left, you're pretty much going to have a lost ball, be re-teeing depending on what kind of stakes they put out there. So you're going to see a lot of players lay up off the tee, probably closer to something in this range where you're hitting it. Let's see what we got. We set our target 1 here, like 227 yards off the tee. That would make a whole lot of sense. 4-iron, it's something like 150 in. So it's a little bit less gettable than it looks like on the satellite imagery, just because that force down the left is a little bit scary and certainly going to play some mind games out there. Hole 2 is 476 yards. So hole 1 was an example of one of those really short par 4s. This is an example of one of the longer par 4s. So even if you get it out there solid right around 300 yards, you're going to have a 175 yard plus approach shot. And even though it is one of the larger greens at this golf course, it still has a ton of undulation. It's well protected in terms of bunkers. It's also a little bit raised. So hole number 2 kind of shows you the identity here. You have to hit a really solid shot off the tee to give yourself a shot into these greens, and if you miss, there's going to be a huge penalty. I mean, like I said, all of these bunker shots, you're dealing with a lot of undulation, and if you short side yourself, you're going to be dealing with slopes down from left to right here. If you short side yourself over here to the right, it's going to be hard to stop the ball in front of the pin over here. Just a well-designed golf course that I'm expecting to play relatively difficult this week. Well, number 3 is a 200-plus yard par 3, so an example of one of those longer shots off the tee. Now, they could use this up tee box, which I'd expect them to do from day to day, but you're still looking at right around 175 yards in. Hole number 4 is another. This is actually going to be a long par 4, so it's listed as a par 5 here, but for the tournament will be a par 4. It's going to be one of those longer end of the spectrum where you're looking at right around 175 yards plus into the green. So another shot where you're going to have to buckle up with a long iron, hit this relatively small green, which is designed to be a par 5. Obviously, because they're playing it as a par 4, I'm going to be on the tougher end of the spectrum. Hole number 5 is one of the few holes that's close to being 450 yards, but they're playing it from even further back this week. So I believe the scorecard yardage that we have is right around 470, 465 yards for this week. In either circumstance, though, it is one of the more gettable holes because there's not much penalty off the tee. There's no real force to the left, while there are trees to the right. There's a huge bailout area, relatively large fairway here in hole number 5. So set up a good angle into this green, hit something in that 150 to 125 yard range, depending on how aggressive you are off the tee, and take advantage of hole 5 because there's not that many gettable holes. Hole 6 is another gut punch, a 200+ yard par 3 to deal with, also well bunkered. You can see bunkers in pretty much every corner except over the green. Hole 7 is another par 4 that's going to play longer than what we see here on the scorecard. So I believe the tee box they're using is going to be further back towards these bunkers. It's going to play closer to 470 yards on the scorecard. The tee shot is difficult because of the bunkering. This bunker over to the right is not in play, but these ones to the left are. And this green, even though it is on the larger side for this golf course, is also one of the more undulated. So that's pretty much the trade-off you're going to get here, is the larger greens are going to have a ton of undulation and the smaller greens might be a little bit flatter, but they're going to have a ton of sand hazards around them. So that's what Stanley Thompson, likes to do with his designs, and that's what you see here. Another long par 3, 220 yards. Really hard to hit the surface here because it is so narrow. You can see it's more of a diagonal green than anything. So if you can hit a draw, you have a little bit of a better chance of holding this green, but pretty hard task either way. Hole 9 is a par 5, so it's the first par 5 we get on the schedule. It's 544 yards. Like I said, very gettable. So hole 9 and hole 11, we'll get to 11 here in a second, a hole that the entire field should be able to reach into if they get it in the fairway. If you get it out here right around 280, it's only 250 yards. And if you get it out there 300 yards, like most of the field will, you're talking about 210, maybe even just 200 yards into this green. So an eagle hole for sure. Hole 10, a gettable par 4, so you could look at a little bit of a birdie streak. If you're starting on the front 9, you're able to birdie that par 5. You're able to take advantage of this really short par 4, which isn't drivable, even though it is only 370 yards. You have a little bit of a split in the fairway, a little bit of a rough patch here, which means that most players will be laying up off the tee with an iron and then having some sort of a wedge into this green. So this is going to be the hardest leg in that 3-leg stretch there, but if you can birdie hole number 10 and then take advantage of hole number 11, which much like 9 is extremely gettable, should be reachable for pretty much the entire field, you're looking at a snowman. So if you're playing in Draftkings, any type of fantasy format, obviously going to get a boost for doing that sort of thing, but much like hole number 9, get it out there, 300 yards, then you have 250 yards or less into this green. Hole 12 is around 400 yards for a par 4, so on the shorter end of the spectrum. Another one of the holes that you're hoping to take advantage of. So I'd argue that even 9 through 12, might be the most gettable stretch on the golf course. So if you're starting on the front 9, maybe you had a rough start because of some of those longer par 4s. This is the part of the golf course to take advantage of. So you can see it's relatively wide off the tee. These fairway bunkers aren't even that much in play because of how much room you have with the rough there. Just hit it in the fairway, maybe with a 3-wood, that sort of thing, and set up a wedge into this green. So it's another straightforward hole. Hole 13 is another long par 3. So this is where you're going to see the course rear its ugly head. The last 5 holes here are pretty brutal. So this is a brutal hole. It's over 200 yards with your approach. Hole 14, nearly a 500-yard par 4, so another hole, we're talking about a 175+ yard approach, if not longer. So another hole that's going to be tough for these players that has plenty of bunkering. Hole 15 is a par 5. It is the longest par 5 at this golf course, so 570 yards. Will still be reachable for the longer players on tour, like a Rory McIlroy, Justin Thomas. They're not going to have any issue reaching here, but the shorter guys will likely lay up. The layup zone is large, particularly if you lay up a little bit further back. Set up something in that 100 to 110 yard range. This still should be a birdie hole. So don't get me wrong, even though it is one of the longer par 5s, it is still a hole that you're hoping to make birdie on. But this last 3-hole stretch, hold on, because it's going to be exciting here every day. So 16, one of the hardest par 3s. It's the most bunkered par 3 and also 212 yards. It's not an easy green to hold as it tends to be a little bit firm, at least from the coverage that we saw back in the day. So a golf hole that you're looking to make par on. So, the Billy Horschel strategy of just going out there, hitting the green and 2-putting, that's what you're looking at here on 16. 17 is a long par 4, 485, dogleg from left to right. This bunker isn't really in play off the tee, more for amateurs than it is for these professionals. But if you miss in the rough here, you're looking at a 175, maybe even a 200+ yard approach shot out of the rough, making this almost a 5-shot hole. And finally, 18, another relatively long par 4, but this green here on 18 is ridiculous. So let's just skip up to the green shade when I'm talking about the tee shot. is narrow. You do have this fairway bunker to the right, but more than anything, this green sucks. It's got a ton of undulation to it, and depending on where they put the pin location, I mean, it could be borderline unfair. A lot of the slope will run your shots into these bunkers that are greenside, and in general, it's going to be an entertaining last hole. You know, as most golf courses are, they tend to make one of the last, you know, 3 holes, whatever it may be, the higher handicap holes, and that is the case here with St. George's as well. Now that we've seen the golf course, let's talk about the skill set for success. So first off, some key stats. My number one is going to be driving accuracy. As you could probably tell around this venue, if you're not hitting fairways, you're going to be in trouble. So first and foremost, with the short par fours, you need to be setting up a wedge out of the fairway so you can take advantage of those holes. But those long par fours, if you're not in the fairway there, you're going to have 200 plus yards out of 3.5, 4-inch Kentucky bluegrass rough. You know, good luck at that point, right? I mean, you're talking about extremely difficult holes if you're not hitting out of the fairway. So that's why it comes in at number one. So taking a look at fairways gained, that'd be another way to encapsulate this metric. And like I said, a lot of that is caused due to the rough. Number two would be weighted shots gained approach. So like I said, we are definitely going to hunker down on proximity buckets because there's such an emphasis on the 200 plus yard range, the 175 to 200 yard range, in the 50 to 125 yard range. There's going to be a lot of extra weighting there. So we'll talk about the specifics, obviously, with the course breakdown video. I should say, sorry, the core picks video. You'll be able to see my actual weighting there, but that is going to be how we tackle that. Number three would be shots gained putting. These are bent grass surfaces, so of course, adding some extra emphasis there. And because we've had bent grass for the last 3 to 4 weeks, also taking a look at some of the recent form when it comes with the putting splits. A few other key stats, we do have shots gained around the green with just 4,000 square foot greens. You're going to see plenty of them missed. Looking at par 3 scoring, also par 5 scoring, with a little bit of a unique setup at this par 70. Comp course history, taking a look at that. We'll talk about the comps here in a second. Sand saves and shots gained approach out of the rough. Shots gained approach out of the rough ended up being a lucrative stat for us at TPC Potomac, something that I was hunkering down on, which led us to guys like a Max Homa going to be using a very similar strategy this week with almost identical conditions in terms of rough. In terms of comp courses, we have TPC Southwind at number one, which is a golf course that's a short par 70 bent grass greens. You're talking about precision over power. And while a lot of that is caused by water at TPC Southwind, one of the golf courses where you see the most water shots of any course on the PGA Tour, it's going to be a very similar effect this week, right? There won't be all these penalty shots, but you know, when you're hitting in the rough, you're looking at a third to maybe half a stroke penalty. And of course, with some of those dense forested areas, you could see a penalty from that front. Number two, we have Colonial Country Club, which I mentioned as a comp earlier. Another positional golf course, bent grass greens, ton of undulation on the surfaces, and also very small greens. So just a great comp course there. Obviously different parts of the country. One is in Texas, one's up there north in Canada, but from a skill set perspective, almost identical. And lastly, we have Harbor Town Golf Links, which is, again, another positional golf course, par 70 short golf course, where you have to be accurate off the tee, hit some small greens, and make some putts on some tricky greens. So I love all three comp courses. They're all very strong comps for me this week, and ones that I'm going to be incorporating heavily into my analysis. All right, that's all I've got for the course breakdown. Before you hop on out of here, let me know what you think the winning score this week's going to be down in the comments. For me, I'm going to have to take 10 under par. I expect this place to play difficult, particularly over the weekend when that rough gets a little bit gnarly. These greens get a little bit firmer and faster, but go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below. Just for context, the last time they played here, even when Pedersen took this to a 60 and shot a -10, set the course record, the winning score that week was -14, and he won that golf tournament. So just understand this is a difficult track, but go ahead and let me know down below what you're taking. As per usual, we'll have the regular slate of content coming for you guys. So core picks coming out today, some value picks, fades and sleepers, prize picks videos, showdown content. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I recommend you do so you don't miss any of that content when it drops. Also, make sure you smash the like button before you hop on out of here. I appreciate all the support, guys. Best of luck with all of your lineups and outright bets this week, and let's get this cash.